Please, just for a moment, close your eyes. Try to remember the exact smell of onions slowly sizzling in rich lard on a Sunday morning. Try to hear the heavy, rhythmic ticking of the mechanical clock on your grandmother's kitchen wall. Can you feel the texture of those memories? Today we are going to travel back in time to 1970s and 1980s Hungary. We are going to open a door to a world that no longer exists, but one that remains perfectly preserved in our hearts. In this journey, we will rediscover 20 forgotten everyday objects that defined our childhoods, our homes, and our shared culture. These were not just things, they were the silent witnesses to our youth. Stay with me until the very end, because the final object we will remember today is perhaps the most fragile and touching piece of our past. One that still guards the deepest secrets of our family living rooms. Before we begin our journey, let us take a deep breath and remember how time used to feel. In the 1970s, time did not sprint the way it does today. It flowed like a wide, calm river. We lived in a world where waiting was a natural part of existence. We waited for the television broadcast to start on a Monday. We waited for a phone line to be installed. And we waited for our loved ones to arrive because we could not simply send them a text message. Many people today might look back at our youth and think we had very little. They might think that without modern technology, our lives were somehow poorer. But you and I know the profound truth. Our lives were infinitely richer in genuine human connection. The objects we had in our homes were built to last, and because we had fewer things, we valued them immensely. We repaired what was broken instead of throwing it away. A simple Sunday afternoon spent in a small panel apartment, sitting on a modular sofa and talking with neighbors, held more warmth and sincerity than 1,000 digital conversations today. We were present in the moment, deeply rooted in the physical world around us. Now, let us walk through those memories together. Let us begin with those long, dark winter evenings and remember the absolute magic of the Hungarian slide projector. Do you remember the distinct metallic smell of the projector as the bulb slowly heated up inside its casing? It was not just a simple device, it was a sacred ritual that brought the entire family together on the living room carpet. Your father or grandfather would carefully pull down the white roller blind or pin a freshly ironed sheet against the floral wallpaper. The room would go completely dark, and then a magical beam of light would cut through the dusty air. You would sit on the floor, hugging your knees, waiting in absolute silence. Then came the unmistakable click of the film advancing to the next frame. The colors on the wall were vibrant, yet slightly blurred at the edges, telling stories of brave heroes and talking animals. There was no background music, no fast-moving images. Just the soothing, rhythmic voice of your mother reading the captions aloud. Her words blended perfectly with the quiet, continuous hum of the machine. The projector would get incredibly hot to the touch, and you knew you had to be careful not to burn your small fingers. When the story ended, the room felt different, as if you had all just returned from a long journey. That machine projected warmth, imagination, and a sense of absolute safety that we carry with us to this very day. Now let us move to the kitchen table and talk about the heavy metal soda siphon. If you lived in Hungary in the 1970s, this object was absolutely indispensable in your home. Do you recall the sheer weight of that thick aluminum body? Making soda water was not just pushing a button like today. It was a mechanical process that required strength and a bit of bravery. You had to take the small, heavy metal gas cartridges, place one into the holder, and screw it onto the head of the siphon. You would twist it tighter and tighter until suddenly you heard that sharp, aggressive hiss as the carbon dioxide rushed into the cold water. The metal bottle would instantly turn cold, sometimes even frosting over on a hot summer day. Bringing those empty cartridges back to the local grocery store to exchange them for full ones was a weekly chore, often assigned to the children of the family. The clinking sound those metal bullets made in your string bag as you walked down the street was the soundtrack of a Saturday morning. When you pressed a heavy lever, the water would shoot out with incredible force, creating the perfect bubbly base for a glass of sweet, homemade raspberry syrup. Today we buy plastic bottles that we throw away without a second thought. But that metal siphon was a permanent resident of our homes, built to last a lifetime. And speaking of the kitchen, we cannot forget the iconic nylon housecoat, known to every Hungarian as the othonka. Try to picture your mother or grandmother bustling around the house. Almost certainly, she was wearing one of these brilliantly colored, incredibly practical garments. The fabric was entirely synthetic, often covered in bold floral patterns or geometric shapes that never seemed to fade, no matter how many times it was washed. Do you remember the distinct rustling sound it made when she walked rapidly from the stove to the dining table? It was a sound that meant someone was taking care of you. The othonka always had two large pockets on the front. Those pockets were truly magical. They held everything a grandmother might need. A neatly folded cloth handkerchief, the key to the pantry, a few coins for the baker, and often a piece of hard candy wrapped in cellophane, waiting just for you. Wearing the othonka was a clear boundary between the outside world and the sanctuary of the home. The moment a woman stepped through the front door after work, the formal clothes came off, the nylon housecoat went on, and the evening chores began. It was not a fashion statement, it was a uniform of domestic love, hard work, and endless dedication to the family. Let us step outside, into the weekend garden or the small balcony, where the unmistakable crackle of the Sokol radio filled the air. This small, rectangular device, wrapped in its thick brown leather case, was a constant companion for millions of Hungarians. The leather had a specific, dry smell that mixed perfectly with the scent of blooming geraniums or roasting meats. Do you remember how difficult it was to tune into a station? You had to turn that small plastic wheel with incredible precision. You would hear a storm of static, strange whistling noises, and fragments of foreign languages before finally locking onto the soothing voice of the Budapest announcer. The speaker was not of high quality, so the sound always had a slightly tinny, distant echo to it, but that did not matter. On Sunday afternoons, as families sat down to eat their chicken soup and breaded meat, the Sokol radio was always there, broadcasting the afternoon play or the weekly sports results. Grandfathers would press it close to their ears to catch the news, their faces serious and concentrated. It was our tiny portable window to a much larger world, bringing music, news, and culture into the most remote weekend houses and the smallest apartment kitchens. Now, let us remember the undisputed king of the Hungarian roads, the Trabant automobile. If your family was lucky enough to own one, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Long before you even saw the car, you could smell it. The blue smoke from its two-stroke engine had a sharp, oily scent that instantly brings back memories of childhood road trips. Do you remember the unique popping sound of the engine as it idled in the driveway? Getting into a Trabant was a physical experience. The doors were incredibly light, made of that famous synthetic material, and they closed with a very specific hollow click. Inside, the space was incredibly small, yet somehow an entire family of 4, along with luggage and a tent, managed to fit inside for a 2-week holiday. The steering wheel was thin and hard, and the gear shift was a strange lever mounted right on the steering column. When your father shifted gears, the whole car seemed to hold its breath before lurching forward. In the winter, you had to scrape the ice off the inside of the windows because the heater barely worked. But despite all its flaws, the Trabant was not just a machine. It was a beloved family member. People talked to it, patted its dashboard, and forgave it every time it broke down, because it gave us the ultimate gift of freedom. And where did we usually travel in those packed cars? To the shores of Lake Balaton, of course. Here we encounter another unforgettable object, the Palma rubber air mattress. This was not the flimsy plastic float you see today. The Palma mattress was heavy, thick, and smelled strongly of pure industrial rubber, especially when it was left out in the baking summer sun. Do you remember the sheer physical effort it took to inflate it? We did not have electric pumps, we had our own lungs. You would stand on the grassy beach, blowing air into the valve until you felt dizzy and saw spots before your eyes. Once it was finally inflated, it had a beautiful ribbed texture, usually in a deep blue or striking red color. laying on it in the shallow, milky green waters of Lake Balaton was pure heaven. The rubber would get surprisingly hot above the waterline, but it kept you safely afloat as you drifted away from the shore, listening to the distant sounds of children splashing and vendors shouting about fresh corn on the cob. At the end of the holiday, deflating the mattress and folding it up was a sad ritual. The powdery smell of the rubber as it was packed into the trunk meant that summer was officially over and the long school year was about to begin. Let us talk about a taste that defined our childhoods, wrapped in a very specific piece of packaging. I am talking about the original Turo Rudi. While this sweet treat still exists today, true children of the 1970s and 80s know that the original experience was entirely different. Do you remember the thin, aluminium foil packaging covered in bright red dots? Unwrapping it was an art form. The foil was fragile, and it made a soft, crinkling sound as you carefully peeled it back. The moment you opened it, you were greeted by the scent of rich, dark chocolate and slightly sour, fresh cottage cheese. The chocolate coating on the old Turo Rudi was incredibly thick and brittle. When you took your first bite, the chocolate would snap loudly, often cracking and falling onto your shirt. The contrast between the bitter, hard chocolate shell and the cool, sweet, and slightly tangy cheese filling inside was a culinary masterpiece. We would buy them at the local school buffet or as a special reward after a good grade. Sometimes they were slightly crushed from sitting in a school bag, but they tasted just as wonderful. That red-dotted foil was a symbol of pure, simple joy in a time when sweets were an occasional luxury, not a daily habit. Let us return to the living room and look at the most important piece of furniture, the heavy Videoton television set. This was not a flat, lightweight screen hanging on a wall. It was a massive wooden box that dominated the room, often resting on a dedicated table with a decorative lace cloth draped over the top. Turning it on was a test of patience. You would press the heavy mechanical power button with a loud click, and then you waited. The cathode ray tube inside took its time to warm up. First, you would hear a low hum, then a tiny dot of light would appear in the center of the dark screen, slowly expanding into a blurry black and white image. Do you remember the struggle with the rabbit ear antennas? Whenever the picture turned into a storm of static snow, someone had to stand by the television, moving the metal rods around, trying to catch a clear signal from the broadcasting tower. And of course, we all remember Mondays. On Mondays, there was no broadcast at all. The television remained silent and dark, forcing families to talk, play cards, or read books. Looking back, that weekly pause from the screen was not a deprivation. It was a blessing in disguise, a forced rest that kept us connected to each other instead of staring at a glowing box. If we think back to our early school days, there is one specific memory that instantly brings back the taste of morning break time. It is the school milk, known as iskolatei, served in those unforgettable plastic pouches. Do you remember the feel of that floppy, slightly warm plastic bag resting in your hand? It was a brilliant, if highly impractical invention. There were no caps or easy tear edges. To drink the milk, you had to bite off one of the top corners of the pouch with your own teeth. If you bit off too little, the milk would barely drip out. If you bit off too much, the milk would spill all over your uniform, leaving a sticky, sour-smelling stain for the rest of the day. But despite the mess, we loved it. The milk always tasted exceptionally fresh and rich. And then there was the ultimate prize. On certain days, usually Fridays, the white milk was replaced with chocolate milk in those same pouches. The excitement in the classroom was electric. We would squeeze every last drop out of the plastic, flattening the pouch completely on our desks. It was a small, state-provided luxury that made the long, tiring school mornings bearable, teaching us to appreciate the simplest of rewards. Let us take a walk down the street to the local state-run grocery store, the famous Közert. Just closing your eyes and imagining the entrance brings back a rush of sensory memories. The first thing that hit you was the smell. It was an unmistakable blend of freshly baked bread, roasted coffee beans being ground in the massive industrial grinder near the door, and the slightly sharp scent of floor wax. Do you remember the heavy wire shopping baskets? The handles were often covered in a thick, cracked red plastic tube, but they still dug into your palms as you carried your groceries. Walking through the aisles, the wooden shelves were organized with military precision, displaying rows of canned goods and glass jars of pickled vegetables. But the heart of the store was the cashier's desk. The mechanical cash register was a masterpiece of noisy engineering. With every item, the cashier would punch the heavy metal keys, followed by a loud crank or the violent ringing of a bell as the cash drawer shot open. There were no barcodes, no quiet electronic beeps. Buying daily bread and milk was a loud, tactile, and highly social experience, where the cashier knew your mother's name and always asked about your grades. If you walk into a Hungarian bathroom in the 1970s or 80s, one specific brand dominated the shelves: the legendary Fabulon Cosmetics. Do you remember the iconic advertising posters featuring the beautiful face of the Fabulon girl looking down at us from the sides of buildings in Budapest? Opening a bottle of Fabulon sun lotion or face cream released a scent that is permanently wired into our brains. It was a clean, slightly powdery, very distinct floral fragrance. The sun lotion came in a white plastic bottle with blue lettering. Before heading to the beach, mothers would vigorously rub this thick white cream onto our shoulders and backs. It took quite a while to absorb, leaving us looking pale and smelling like a walking flower garden. We trusted that smell. It meant summer holidays, care, and protection. Teenagers proudly displayed Fabulon acne creams on their shelves, feeling modern and sophisticated. The packaging was simple, yet incredibly elegant for its time. Even today, if you were to catch a faint whiff of that specific powdery scent, you would instantly be transported back to a small, humid bathroom, getting ready for a summer evening walk along the promenade. Let us talk about the true heart of the kitchen, the Lehel refrigerator. This was not a silent, sleek appliance that blended into the background. The Lehel fridge had a personality, and more importantly, it had a voice. Do you remember the violent, rattling shudder it made every time the compressor kicked in? The whole kitchen seemed to vibrate for a few seconds. It was a short, stout machine, usually painted in a creamy white that slowly turned slightly yellow over the decades. The door had a thick, heavy handle that required a good, strong yank to pull open, releasing a wave of cold air smelling of cured sausage and leftover soup. But the most memorable ritual associated with the Lehel fridge was the process of defrosting it. Because it was not frost-free, thick layers of ice would build up inside the tiny freezer compartment. Every few months, your mother would unplug it, lay down old newspapers on the kitchen floor, and place pots of steaming hot water inside to melt the glacier. You could hear the ice cracking and chunks falling onto the metal shelves. It was a messy, time-consuming chore, but it was part of taking care of a home. That noisy machine reliably kept our food fresh through incredibly hot summers and long winters. For teenagers growing up in the late 1970s, there was one item of clothing that represented the ultimate dream of independence: the trapper jeans. Before the influx of Western brands, owning a pair of Hungarian-made trapper jeans was a massive status symbol. Do you remember how incredibly stiff the denim was when you first bought them? You practically had to wrestle your way into the pants. The fabric was heavy, dark blue, and smelled strongly of fresh dye and cotton. The gold-colored stitching and the leather patch on the back were badges of honor. Getting them to fade and soften took months of dedicated wear. Teenagers would even sit in a bathtub full of warm water while wearing their new trapper jeans, hoping it would make the stiff fabric mold perfectly to their bodies. Walking down the street in a perfectly worn-in pair, paired with a colorful nylon shirt, made you feel invincible. The sound of the thick denim rubbing together as you walked was the sound of youth rebellion and changing times. Those jeans were tough, durable, and completely unforgiving, much like the era itself, but we loved them fiercely because they were our very own. Let us shrink our focus to something small enough to fit in the palm of your hand, yet precious enough to be traded like gold in the schoolyard. I am talking about the pocket calendar cards, the kártyanaptár. Do you remember the excitement of January when everyone began collecting these small glossy pieces of cardboard? On one side, there was a tiny calendar for the year. On the other side, there was an advertisement, a beautiful landscape, a popular singer, or a cartoon character. They always smelled faintly of fresh printing ink and chemical gloss. Collecting them was a serious hobby. children and adults alike kept them carefully stacked in rubber bands or arranged in special photo albums. The real magic happened during the trades. You would sit on a bench with your friends, carefully fanning out your duplicates. The negotiations were intense. I will give you 2 heavy industry calendars for 1 Fabulon girl calendar. Running your thumb over the smooth, shiny surface of a brand new card was incredibly satisfying. They were a cheap, beautiful form of everyday art. Today, we carry the entire world's calendar on our phones. But the joy of holding a physical, beautifully printed pocket calendar is something a digital screen can never replicate. Speaking of schoolyards, let us look down at our feet and remember the iconic Tisa sport shoes. Long before global athletic brands dominated the market, the bold letter T on the side of a shoe was all you needed to be fashionable. Do you remember the distinct smell of a brand new pair of Tisa shoes? It was a strong, sharp mixture of vulcanized rubber, canvas, and glue. The soles were thick and practically indestructible. We wore them for everything. They were our designated shoes for physical education classes, squeaking loudly on the varnished wooden floors of the school gymnasium. But we also wore them on the weekends, playing football on the dusty fields until the white canvas turned a permanent shade of grey. Tying the thick, white cotton laces tight before a race gave you a feeling of immense speed and agility. They were not particularly breathable, and by the end of a hot summer day, your feet would be absolutely roasting inside them. Yet the Tisa shoe was a symbol of Hungarian manufacturing pride. It was durable, honest, and uniquely ours, carrying us through the countless adventures and scraped knees of our vibrant youth. Let us cool down with a drink that is universally recognized by anyone who grew up in this era, the famous Bambi orange drink. Before international sodas became widely available, Bambi was the absolute king of sweet beverages. Do you remember holding that heavy ribbed glass bottle? It felt substantial in your hand, and the glass was often scratched and worn from being washed and reused countless times. The metal crown cap required a heavy opener, and popping it off released a tiny hiss of carbonation. But the most unforgettable part was the taste. Bambi was incredibly sweet, almost sticky, with an artificial orange flavor that coated your tongue and left a distinct, sugary aftertaste. It was the perfect companion to a warm, greasy lángos at the beach or a savory pogača at the cinema. Drinking a Bambi was a slow, deliberate act of enjoyment. You did not chug it. You savored every single sugary drop. When you finished, you carefully returned the heavy glass bottle to the vendor to claim your deposit. That sticky, incredibly sweet orange flavor is instantly recognizable, forever linked to sunny afternoons, family outings, and the simple joy of a childhood treat. Let us step back into the living room and look at the walls. In millions of Hungarian panel apartments, there was one piece of furniture that defined the entire space: the Varia modular wall unit. This massive wooden structure covered an entire wall from floor to ceiling. Do you remember the smell of the wood veneer and the furniture polish your mother used every weekend to keep it shining? The Varia was an architectural marvel of domestic life. It had glass display cabinets, hidden drawers, a drop-down door that served as a miniature bar, and endless open shelves. It was the heart of the family's identity. Behind the glass, mothers proudly displayed their best crystal glasses, porcelain figures, and untouched sets of silver cutlery, waiting for guests who rarely used them. The open shelves were filled with encyclopedias and matching sets of classic literature, their spines perfectly aligned. Opening one of the heavy wooden doors produced a solid, satisfying thud. The Varia unit was heavy, immovable, and incredibly comforting. It made a small, identical concrete apartment feel like a unique, personalized castle, holding all the family's treasures, secrets, and proudly displayed memories within its wooden embrace. If we look inside the drawers of a childhood desk, we will undoubtedly find the classic blue-lined school notebooks. Do you remember the exact shade of that pale blue paper? It was quite thin, and if you pressed too hard with your fountain pen, the ink would bleed straight through to the other side. But the most magical part of these notebooks was the single sheet of pink blotting paper tucked loosely just inside the front cover. The smell of those new notebooks in September was intoxicating, a dusty, papery promise of a new school year. Writing in them was a careful, deliberate act. You had to dip your pen, write a few words, and then carefully press the soft, textured pink blotting paper over the wet ink to dry it instantly and prevent smudging. It taught us patience. You could not rush your homework. You had to respect the ink and the paper.
Seeing a notebook fill up with neat, cursive handwriting, accompanied by the red ink corrections of the teacher, was a visual map of our education. That simple sheet of pink blotting paper, slowly turning purple with absorbed ink stains over the months, was a silent companion to every struggle and triumph of our school days. Let us remember a special treat that we usually begged for at the local farmers' market or village fair. The famous rooster lollipop, the kakasos nyaloka. This was not a neatly packaged, perfectly round piece of factory candy. Do you remember the sight of them? They were large, flat pieces of bright red, hardened sugar on a simple wooden stick, roughly shaped to look like a rooster. The edges were often incredibly sharp. When you took your first lick, the sugar was hard as glass, and it had a distinct burnt caramel flavor mixed with intense sweetness. Eating a rooster lollipop was a commitment. It took hours to finish. You would walk through the crowded market, clutching the sticky wooden stick, trying not to let the melting red sugar drip onto your clothes. Often by the time you were half finished, your tongue and lips were stained a bright, alarming shade of red, and the sharp edges had slightly scratched the roof of your mouth. But it was entirely worth it. The rooster lollipop was wild, imperfect, and wonderfully rustic. It was a sweet reward for waking up early on a weekend to walk through the noisy, vibrant market stalls with your grandparents. Finally, as promised, let us return to the class display cabinet of that Varia wall unit to look at the most delicate objects in the house, the Holohasa porcelain figures. Every family had at least one. Do you remember the cold, incredibly smooth touch of the glazed porcelain? Perhaps it was a beautiful woman in traditional Hungarian folk dress, a majestic deer, or a pair of white doves. These figures were absolutely forbidden for children to play with. We could only look at them through the glass. Once a month, your mother or grandmother would carefully take them out to dust them. You would watch in silence as you wiped the intricate, hand-painted details with a soft cloth. They did not do anything. They were not practical, but they held immense emotional weight. They were often wedding gifts, family heirlooms passed down from generation to generation, representing beauty and grace in a sometimes grey and difficult world. The faint clinking sound they made when placed back on the glass shelf was the sound of preserving heritage. Today, they still sit in our cabinets, silent, fragile witnesses to the passage of time, holding the memories of the hands that so lovingly dusted them decades ago. As we close this door to the past, we must ask ourselves a question. When we look back at the heavy metal soda siphons, the noisy refrigerators, or the fading photographs of us wearing trapper jeans, what is it that we are truly missing? It is not the plastic, the metal, or the wood. We are mourning the loss of our youth. We miss the feeling of time standing still. We miss the absolute certainty that our families were safe in the glow of a slide projector. We miss a world where things were built to last, and where human connections were as strong and durable as the objects we held in our hands. Thank you for taking this deeply emotional journey back to 1970s Hungary with me. If these memories brought a tear to your eye or a smile to your face, please gently press the like button and subscribe to our channel for more journeys into the past. And now, I want to hear your voice. Which of these 20 objects was most important in your childhood home? Or is there another precious memory you wish to share? Please, write your story in the comments below, because your memories are the true history of our generation.